4,000 meters below the surface. The pressure doesn't just crush steel, it silences screams. In early 2026, a covert salvage operation descended on the decommissioned abyssal research station Vespertine, a rusting coffin anchored to the seafloor that had been dark for 7 years. The recovery team wasn't looking for survivors. They were sent to retrieve the audio drives, the black box recordings of the last crew's night shift logs. What they found were not the dry technical entries of a standard mission. These logs were frantic, whispered confessions of 3 men and women who realized, far too late, that the crushing silence of the Hadal Zone is anything but silent. I'm going to play you the restored, unedited transmissions that were immediately classified and buried by the overseeing agency. From the first rhythmic tapping on the titanium hull that spelled out a crew member's name in perfect Morse code, to the bioluminescent shapes that drifted through the ink-black water and began to mimic the voices of the dead, these final entries document a descent into a madness that wasn't psychological, it was predatory. Listen closely. The abyss has had 7 years to learn your voice, and it is a very patient learner. My name is Darian Cross. I served as the submersible pilot and comms officer aboard Vespertine, a 3-person research station anchored to the seafloor at 3,940 meters in the Mariana Volcanic Arc, and I'm recording this on the night of October 16th. After the 3rd consecutive shift where the hull has started talking back, the descent was routine, the first month lonely but manageable, with the usual creaks and groans of titanium adjusting to 16,000 pounds per square inch. The kind of sounds you learn to sleep through, because the alternative is staring at the ceiling and thinking about the miles of black water between you and sunlight. But around midnight on October 12th, a new sound joined the station's heartbeat, a sharp metallic tap repeating in groups of 3, then 5, then patterns that felt deliberate, as if someone was on the outside to pin a wrench against the pressure hull. I ran diagnostics, checked all external manipulator arms, listened to the hydrophone array, and what I heard froze my hands over the console. The tapping wasn't random. It was spelling out letters in Morse code, slow and patient, Darian. Over and over, then COM, then a pause so long I thought it had stopped, before it tapped OPN. I woke my colleague, microbiologist Linnea Hargrove, and we sat in silence listening to the whole spell our names and the names of crewmates who had died on previous missions. Names we'd never shared over open comms, and in the hydrophone recording we could hear, beneath the tapping, a wet, organic shifting, like enormous muscle fibers contracting against the outer plating. The tapping has grown more insistent each night. I swear I've started to hear my own voice coming through the external speakers, tinny and distorted, repeating phrases I've only ever whispered to myself in the dark. Last night, I caught myself standing at the inner airlock door at 3 a.m. with my hand on the manual release wheel. No memory of walking there, just a cold certainty that I had been answering a call I couldn't consciously hear. Our chief engineer, Orson Whitlock, says the stress and the helium-rich atmosphere are causing auditory hallucinations and microsleep episodes. But Orson hasn't spent as many hours listening to the hydrophone as I have. I've started transcribing the taps into a log, and the messages are evolving. They no longer just recite names, they're forming short sentences now. Things like the cold is a kindness, and we breathed before you named the sea and last night. Just before the tapping stopped, it spelled out, "We have your voice, Darian. Let us use it to sing." I haven't told the others about that last one because I'm terrified they'll hear the same thing in my voice when I speak, and I've begun noticing that my own recorded logs sound slightly off, as if something is layering an echo into my words that I didn't put there. Tonight, As I record this, the pressure gauge on the primary airlock is fluctuating without any mechanical cause, the needle bouncing in time with the taps. I now understand that the thing out there isn't trying to break in. It's been learning my rhythm so perfectly that it no longer needs me to open the door, because it already knows how to convince my own hands to do it for me. The emergency vent system just cycled on its own, and I can hear my mother's voice in the hiss of the escaping air. And I need to stop this log now, because I don't trust what my voice might say next. Linnea Hargrove here, lead microbiologist on Vesper 9, and I'm documenting what I saw during the night shift on October 17th. 20 hours after Darian's log, because the scientific method requires me to record observations even when those observations contradict every law of biology I was ever taught. Our external cameras were retrofitted to capture bioluminescent organisms in the Hadal zone, and at 2:17 the starboard cam picked up a faint blue-green glow drifting just beyond the reach of our floodlights. A smudge of light that at first I logged as a deep-sea siphonophore, those colonial strings of jellyfish that can stretch for meters and pulse with living electricity. I zoomed in, adjusting for the particulate backscatter, and my stomach dropped when the glow resolved, not into a siphonore, but into the unmistakable shape of a human figure. Arms and legs suspended in a gentle tread, proportions exactly correct but elongated as if someone had stretched a person on a rack and filled the result with cold liquid starlight. It drifted closer, and I told myself it was pareidolia, the brain's tendency to see faces and bodies in random patterns. But then the figure raised its arm and waved at the camera with a slow, deliberate motion that mimicked my own greeting gesture, the one I'd made to the external cam on the day we arrived as a ritual to mark our descent. I froze the frame and captured a still, and what I saw in the image has kept me from sleeping. The figure's face, while blurred by water distortion, was undeniably my own. The same slope of the jaw, the same spacing of the eyes, but the mouth was open in a silent, wavering cry, and around its throat, etched in bioluminescent filaments, were the exact words of the prayer my grandmother used to whisper to me before bed, a polished rhyme I haven't spoken aloud since I was 8 years old. I radioed Darian, but he didn't respond, and when I checked his bunk, he was curled up with his back to the door, murmuring in his sleep about a choir of tapping voices singing his name from inside the ballast tanks. I turned back to my monitors, and the glowing figure had multiplied. There were now 3 of them, identical, all with my face, all waving at different camera feeds simultaneously. And when I switched to the starboard hydrophone channel, I heard my own voice reciting the periodic table of elements in the exact order I'd been using to calm my nerves during the long descent. But the recording also picked up a second voice layered beneath mine, a deep, resonant gurgle that was shaping my words into a question I had never asked aloud. Why did you come down here where the light forgets to fall, where your mother's prayers dissolve into the crushing blue? I slammed the mute button and sat there shaking, repeating to myself that this was high-pressure nervous syndrome, that the helium in the atmosphere was distorting auditory perception, that sensory deprivation was inducing elaborate hallucinations. But then I looked at the external temperature gauge and saw that the water directly around the station had warmed by 12 degrees in 10 minutes. And the only explanation for such a localized thermal spike was the metabolic output of an organism of truly incomprehensible size pressing its body against the hull. I've sealed myself in the lab module, and I can hear what sounds like my grandmother's voice humming the tune from that old Polish rhyme through the ventilation duct. And I'm now forced to accept that whatever is outside doesn't just reflect light. It reflects consciousness, memory, the most private architecture of the self. And I am very afraid that if I open this door, I will learn that the original Linnea Hargrove never surfaced, and I've been a mimic all along. Orson Whitlock, station engineer and designated mission commander, making what I believe will be the final entry in the Vesper-9 operational log on the night of October 18th, approximately 31 hours after we lost contact with Linnea, and 40 minutes after the primary pressure bulkhead began to exhibit structural anomalies that do not correspond to any known failure mode. Darian is gone. He opened the inner airlock door at 4:13 this morning and walked into the moon pool bay without a pressure suit, and the external cams tracked him for 11 seconds before the bioluminescent entities converged and pulled him into a depth where our lights cannot reach, and I can still hear him screaming in a voice that was not his own. A chorus of Darian Cross, layered over a century of lost submariners, until the individual became indistinguishable from the swarm. I have reviewed all remaining data, and the truth is no longer deniable. The tapping, the mimicry, the voice appropriation, these were not attacks. They were an acclimation process. A way for something ancient and distributed throughout the entire Hadal Zone to test whether we were intelligent enough to be worth absorbing. The Vesper-9 hull is now partially integrated with whatever lives in this trench. I can see it happening in real time, the titanium plates fusing with a translucent cartilaginous tissue that has grown over the outer shell like a second skin and inside the station. The air is thickening with a warm, sweet-smelling exhalate that the atmospheric monitors identify as 92% identical to human breath, but 8% something else. Something that registers as unknown biological. It's highly organized and is slowly replacing the oxygen with a medium that I suspect will allow the entity to breathe inside me as easily as it breathes outside the hull. The most terrifying part is not the physical absorption. It's the feeling of peace that comes with it. A deep, narcotic calm that whispers through the ventilation system in the voice of everyone I've ever loved, telling me that the surface was a dream of cold exile. The true home of consciousness is here in the crushing dark, where the pressure transforms flesh into something more permanent. I have been fighting that voice for 6 hours, but I can feel my resistance eroding every time the station's heart beat a low, rhythmic thud that has replaced all mechanical noise pulses through the deck plates and syncs with my own pulse until I can no longer tell where my body ends and the station's living hull begins. The last navigation buoy is prepared, and I am loading this corrupted log onto its drive before jettisoning it to the surface in the desperate hope that someone will find it and understand that Vesper-9 is no longer a human outpost. It's a threshold, and the entity that has claimed it is not malevolent, not hungry, not anything our language can hold. It is simply vast and lonely, and has been waiting for a species curious enough to knock on its door with a steel fist and a nervous heart. The internal lights have just flickered and turned a deep blue-green, and I can see my own reflection in the blank monitor. But the reflection is smiling and I am not. And the reflection is mouthing words that I can now read on my own lips without speaking them. We are the original breath. And we have always been in the deep places. We have always answered every tap with an invitation. I am going to seal this log now and release the buoy, and then I am going to walk into the moon pool bay as Darian did. Because I have accepted that the surface was only ever a temporary exile from the depths where we truly belong. and I would rather join the choir with my own voice than wait for it to be borrowed without my consent. These 3 logs represent only a fraction of the corrupted data recovered from Vesper 9. The remaining recordings were deemed too destabilizing for public release, sealed in a maritime archive that doesn't exist on any public record. But what's clear from the voices we've heard tonight is that when we push into the deepest places on Earth, we're not simply exploring a void, we are entering someone else's territory, a place that has been waiting in the cold and the dark with a patience measured in geological time. If you find yourself alone at night, perhaps near a coastline, and you hear a rhythmic tapping on your window that seems just a little too deliberate, do not answer it. I'm your host from True Terror Files Official, and if you felt the crushing weight of these deep-sea accounts, please tell us in the comments which log would have broken you first. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next set of recovered recordings. Until then, stay out of the water.